Welcome to another episode of the Golden Hour. I'm Sharif Yunus here with Dr. Kevin Majers. Kevin, good to be here with you. How are you?
Sharif, I'm doing well. Great to be here.
Awesome. So we've been getting a number of questions, which is great to get this feedback on the podcast and on people using on people's use of OptimalWork to see, how to improve their experience. So we've been getting a number of questions on one particular theme, so I thought it would be good to take this session to address that, which is how to apply OptimalWork's theory in maybe difficult circumstances that don't seem like where it's easily applicable necessarily. So I thought it would be really helpful to talk through that. So Kevin, maybe I can just start by reading these two questions.
Exactly. Great.
Awesome. So the first question, in regards to the method as a whole, I'm not sure how I can practice this in a setting other than a quiet room, which is hard to come by. I've been able to carve out a few hours here and there to practice the golden hour, but I'm curious how to apply this in an open office space or say when I'm home all day with my children. I understand the concepts from OptimalWork can be applied to many areas of life. I think I just need a little help reimagining it for environments that are not ideal working conditions. So that's question one, or comment one, I should say. And then question two is, what advice would you give people who face life situations that limit achieving golden hours and getting sufficient sleep? I, for example, am trying to write my dissertation, but having a baby prevents me from getting the recommended amount of sleep, and it is difficult to achieve a golden hour without interruptions. How can people who lack a good work environment and a traditional sense of structure to the day use OptimalWork effectively? So I think, these are pretty, they get to the core of it. My initial thought is to maybe distinguish between OptimalWork's general theory of growth and of challenge and of working according to your highest ideals with a spirit of service, and then with the golden hour, and then with maybe OptimalWork.com as a way of living that. So is that, Kevin, you think an appropriate distinction to make or is helpful in these circumstances?
I do think that's a great way to distinguish it. That one thing is challenging yourself according to your highest ideals and learning how to do that continually. So because we talk sometimes about this idea of vital engagement, but that's when flow is lasting all day long. And the only way to do that is by finding continual ways to challenge yourself according to higher, and you could say even more, just simple ideals, wanting to be providing the best service you can continually through the day. So with that kind of goal in mind, then the golden hour is meant to be a kind of training in how to do that, where like if you go to OptimalWork.com and you're doing a golden hour there, well, it just helps you to go through how to reframe this, practicing some mindfulness, and then setting up a challenge. So that's the essential elements you find in every golden hour. And the idea is that if you could practice that intentionally, ideally it'd be like at least just once a day, then you get to practice it all day long. But the real thing is what happens all day long. And so the golden hour is just meant to be a training in how to do that. But doing golden hours isn't the essential thing. It's more about just finding ways of reframing every challenge so that you see it as a way of actually practicing your highest ideals. That's the real essence of it.
The theory of OptimalWork, or the broadest ideas behind it, that's for everyone, and not just for everyone, but something that you can do all the time, which is to take all of these situations that you face and think when you're facing it, okay, how can this bring out the best in me? What's the best I can do right now? And then to act according to those ideals that come out of that thinking. And then the golden hour is, did you develop the idea of the golden hour? Was it specifically for students?
I think that when I originally developed it, it was actually for helping patients do exposure therapy and then helping students and young professionals to really craft an hour of study or work. So in some sense, that's the easiest way to practice it, is when you're in front of a computer doing some quiet work, and then you just have the kind of the freedom to follow the steps one at a time, and then you learn how to have this new kind of dominion over your attention and how to be training yourself and acquiring mastery in what you're doing. But I think any time you could provide a greater service by improving how you work and why you work, then you're actually doing the essential thing of it. So, and so I think that And what I like about these questions is that both of them highlighted in some way the idea of work in the home. And maybe that's, that sometimes people could think, well, that's like not the best scenario to be living this stuff. And I would say, no, it is the perfect place to be living this stuff. In some ways, we have to help people to craft their work and bring a spirit of service into it. Because when you're at work, or if you're a student trying to study, maybe it's not so clear how to be tying it into your highest ideals. And actually how to make this into a real time of actual service so that you're stretching yourself to grow the most so you can give the best to others. I think doing that at work is more of a challenge. At home, it's the best place to do it. I think everything that's done in the home can be done much more immediately with this kind of optimal work approach in mind, that you're really trying to give your best, growing the most in how you do things, improving how you do things, so that nothing in the day is done rotely. You're deliberately crafting it and shaping it, but with this idea that it's all really for service and for it to serve, you could say, the people that you have these deepest bonds with. So because the work in the home touches on the deepest bonds, in psychology it was called attachments. That's a good word in psychology. So it's like the sense that you're really bonded to these people who are meaningful for you. Well, that is actually the ideal place to be living all of these things. Because when you're serving those you love, then you can immediately see how being patient, being encouraging, being cheerful, and so on, all just enriches that kind of service. So I think the home is the kind of the best place to be practicing these things. And in a way, we want people to change how they work, because that's where you spend so much of your time. And if you're changing your approach to work hour by hour in the day, you actually are able to be at your best when you go home. So I think that's, in a way, that's the goal, is that when you're at home, then your family gets the best of you. But if you're working at home, they get that all day long.
Yeah, I think this gets to the idea a little bit of why work is so important. Because I think when for example, if you're working at a desk job all day, it's very easy to just get caught up in kind of achieving these outcomes, and things are getting busy and you have deadlines, and so it's easy for you to lose this spirit of service. Maybe if you're with family during that time, are you saying it's a little bit easier to keep your focus on the bond, but then on the bonds with those you love, but then when you're at work, it can be more difficult. So training yourself and taking this deliberate time to kind of connect with that spirit of service deliberately is extremely helpful. Is that
Yeah, I think so.
way of thinking?
One case is you could imagine two people doing identical jobs. One of them is doing it for the sake of productivity and attaining some better outcomes, making more money, let's say. And the other is doing it very directly in his mind or her mind as a service to their family. And this is how they're best providing. You could think of a CEO, that the CEO could be thinking of improving their bottom line and, getting, so the investors get more returns and so on. Or he or she could be thinking of, how do we really serve the families of our workers in the best way? Well, and that's by helping the company to thrive. So the same work could be done for motives that are more or less noble. Not saying that any of them are actually bad, but there is something more noble when in your mind, you're actually serving real people and real families. And that, I'm saying, is much more directly practicable at home, where what you're doing is directly serving those that you have the deepest bonds with. So it's inherently meaningful. So it could happen that people in that setting are still getting overly focused on attaining certain outcomes, a certain level of cleanliness or order, and those are good things, but they need to be done for the sake of the bond. Everything that takes place at home can be much more directly done for the sake of the bond. And then you can help people to, when you think of shaping work at its highest levels, even on optimal work, when you see the kinds of golden hours that we have, once you get to ideals, you see things like patience and cheerfulness. But I think at home, practicing patience and cheerfulness, well, that is like very much the substance of what it means to do these things, to do them well. That the highest form of mastery at home is precisely patience and cheerfulness, attaining, like maintaining a real tone of joy and peace together. And so I think that using joy and peace as a kind of compass is easy at home, and at work, it takes a little more deliberation to achieve it.
Maybe we could get into the question real quick of maybe it's a little bit of a detour of how to do the golden hour. Maybe it's someone who's working from home, so there are more distractions. But like in the second question, this person is working on their dissertation, but then they have a baby that prevents them from getting a golden hour without interruptions. So is that a real hindrance to doing the golden hour well? Because sometimes you can have this sense when you're setting up the golden hour, okay, I want to like get a lot done. I want to have an hour of quiet work where I can just focus on making progress here. So how does that possibility of interruptions affect the possibility of doing a good golden hour?
Well, I think interruptions never need to affect the quality of the golden hour. It's just like another step that gets inserted. And so you give your whole attention to that step until it's done, and then you put your whole attention back to the step you were on or the next step. So if you're really trying to craft work so that you're following it step by step through, well, an interruption is just an unexpected step, but it doesn't have to take you off your stride. But maybe there's a deeper sense in which when you're at home and you're trying to do, this sense of crafting the work, we always want people to have a sense that they're fully applying themselves in work, and then they take a complete break, and then they fully apply themselves again. Well, in the office, you might be able to do that exactly according to a clock. At home, you're going to have a different way of doing it. There are natural rhythms in life at home. And there are going to be times of setting things up. There are going to be times of cleaning and preparing meals. And then there's the actual time you're spending together with your family, say playing together or in a meal. I think that the preparations and cleanup, that is the work. And then that's when you're in kind of doing mode. You're making sure that you do these things well, and you're trying to do them better and better. But that's for the sake then of the times when you can simply be with your family, kind of being in being mode. So you still need that sense of sprints and breaks, but here is a kind of setup or taking care of order, and then the actual time together. It's so important that people learn to rest together with their family. So a time of rest when you're at home doesn't have to mean, it could, but it doesn't have to mean time that you spend in silence by yourself. Meals should be a time of rest, where your attention is just resting on the people that you're with. And playing together. So if you have young children, actually of any age, you need some time each day where you're just being together, not trying to do anything and not trying to be tweaking them or changing them. So there are natural rhythms at home, and you might not have strict golden hours, but you want to have golden interactions. And at home, the breaks together are actually much more important. That's where you have the warmth of the attachments, and that's what leads people to thrive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think some people can have the idea, okay, how does optimal work apply to friendship or family life? And they would go to the idea of like, okay, does that mean when I'm having lunch with my family or with a friend that I have to reframe mindfulness and set a challenge before that meal starts? So it kind of, yeah, how does the theory apply to those? How does OptimalWork's approach practically apply to those situations? Is that something you would suggest, kind of deliberately going through those steps, or what do you think about that?
Well, certainly it always is a good idea for you to imagine what would the most like warm and cheerful lunch or dinner, what would that look like? And you do want to have something that you're trying to attain. But I think that it has to be different because it's not about just doing something and obtaining outcomes. In work, what you're doing is you're trying to take kind of, you could say, immaterial things and ideals and plans, and then actually shape material reality with them. And so it's all about making it concrete, obtaining particular outcomes, and then you just have to make sure that those are done for the sake of higher motives, for ideals, for bonds. So there is a sense in which work is about obtaining outcomes. And then when you're on a break at work, is that you're no longer seeking to obtain an outcome. I still think even in the office setting, that breaks are best spent with other people, where you get your mind off the thing that you were doing and they rest on the people around you, the things you're with, and having an enjoyable time together. So I think that still happens. And so at home, when you're in, say, a meal or playing with the children, you don't want to have the sense that you're trying to obtain particular outcomes. It's just being with them and just attending to them. And that's where then the real warmth comes in. In that sense, it's a lot more like mindfulness, because you have to be able to detect when you're getting too driven by outcomes, or you're correcting or criticizing or questioning. And then you need to let go of that and just re-engage being with them. And so, I think, in fact, what I was just saying about not questioning or criticizing or, commanding, that comes from a very particular tradition, over 50 years old, called parent-child interaction therapy. So, and the idea here is that as a treatment, a primary form of treatment for anxiety disorders in kids, for even attention problems, oppositional defiant disorder, all these different things, there's a common treatment that helps all of them. And it's essentially 5 minutes a day where one of the parents is just spending time bonding with the child, securing the attachment, deepening the attachment. So secure attachments in children lead them to thrive. So what that means is, and the way they do this kind of therapy, is you spend, for instance, 5 minutes just playing with them. But they have these 3 don'ts. While you're playing together, you don't question anything, you don't criticize anything, and you don't issue commands. It's just being with them in a loving, warm way. So you can comment on what they're doing, you can mirror what they're doing, there are ways of, just bringing up. It's just, you're just attending to them in the most unconditionally positive way. That is one of the most effective treatments we have for children for all of these different disorders. So what works with disorders works to build up, any kind of kid. That we need time just attaching to each other. You have eye contact and you play together. It is amazing how many times when parents try doing this, that they realize, oh, I kept on questioning, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to put that block there? Are you sure you want to? So, and they are offering little criticism and tweaks. Parents want what's best for their kids, but they have to learn to turn off the tweaking, the constant, setting standards and raising the bar in different ways. It's the same in a couple. It's easy for couples to constantly be tweaking each other's behavior, but there has to be time without tweaks, just positive time spent together. And it's really beautiful to see that actually is a treatment. There's a book on this by Donna Pincus called Growing Up Brave. So she's here in Boston at the Card Clinic for Children. It's the Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders. But Growing Up Brave is it's a wonderful book. And she describes how to be spending these 5 minutes of attention, with your children. And the idea is with each child if you have more than one. And the spouses need to do it together. Probably the spouses need like 15 minutes of just being with each other. Not problem solving, not attaining outcomes, not criticizing each other, but just being together. So I think that's exactly how we think of breaks. It's not easy maybe for people to actually be in that kind of mode, when they're at a meal, because they might still think there's all these things to do. But there need to be these oases where it's just joy and peace. It's just being together in an enjoyable way.
Now, could that also be applied to the workplace, where I think it's very common for someone to have the view of OptimalWork applied to work means I try to get more done than my colleagues, or just work is kind of always on my mind, productivity, getting things done. But it's important to see that in the workplace, you're also building bonds with the people that you're working with, that you're working together on a shared project to serve society together. And so it can't just, does that mean that you need to like not just always have conversations focused around work tasks and what needs to be done next, but you also need to work on developing these bonds with coworkers to really kind of raise the tone of the environment there as well.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that the more people have this sense when they're at home, that the people that they're with are really their highest priorities. And the bond they have with these people, with each of them, is the source really of the deepest meaning in life. And prioritizing that bond over everything so that you're willing to sacrifice any particular outcome, even, the meal on time or a clean house, for the sake of the bond. And so the bond always is the guiding light and you're doing everything at home to build the bond. But if you have that spirit at home, I think it's much easier then at work to not see the people you're working with as just means to an end. Like they're just the people there to help you attain outcomes. They're like smart computers or robots. And you just need them to get this thing done for you. And then, no, you need to have this personal interaction with everyone. It's even if like, say you have a restaurant, the customers that come into the restaurant are not just means to the end, helping your bottom line. You try to actually form a relationship with them. And it's a great thing when you see that, it might be that customers come in over years and there's a kind of friendship that forms that's always there. That should happen at work too. I think when we work in the right way and we have the sense that our approach to life is kind of united, we're always the same, then we have this readiness to make friendships everywhere. So then you're doing that at work, as long as it's not, I'm not saying that this means you're spending tons of time with them, because you really may not have that. But you don't have to spend time. You just have to treat them as persons that you're trying to serve and that you're treating them as individuals, not as like interchangeable units of means to an end.
And that also means in some cases making sacrifices for them too, for what you kind of originally wanted to get done at a particular time. Like if you have a project that, I don't know, maybe you feel like you're getting behind and a coworker kind of desperately needs help on a particular issue, it might be worthwhile to actually just help them with that, even though you feel like, okay, it's cutting into my productivity.
Absolutely. Every bond is deepened by your willingness to make sacrifices for it, your willingness to forget yourself, in the context of that bond, your willingness to give yourself generously. So bonds are what bring out the very best in us. They bring out the highest possibility, for how you shape your attitude, with that sincerely putting the bond first and seeing, this is what I can grow in. And your attention, letting it totally be with the others, and then totally giving yourself with a spirit of generosity. So bonds bring out the best in us. And so if you want to thrive at work, you need to be prioritizing bonds. But even then, I think it's more about prioritizing the bonds with those closest to you, your spouse, your children, and so on. And then, yes, in its proper place, the people that you're working with and the people that you're serving through your work.
Well, Kevin, I think this has been a great way of just filling out kind of OptimalWork's approach and how it applies in different areas. I think the stuff about bonds is very powerful. It's something that we'll probably keep coming back to in the future. So, but that's all the time we have for today. So maybe if you have a final thought.
Sure. My final thought would be that if it seems like there's a place in life where this stuff just doesn't apply, I think that it might be that it especially applies there. So, and that looking at ways to challenge yourself according to your highest ideals to really develop the deepest bonds, that happens in all of these odd moments. Any kind of work that would improve, with having a deeper spirit of service and cheerfulness, always will be a place where you can practice these ideas.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. So we'll be
Thanks,
back next week.
All right.